All right, Clay. So here we are with Coda, the latest episode of the series, and the cold open for this one. I think it was a cold open. It was like the first scene got me wondering about Voyager's self-awareness with things. They are making a sex joke, right? In the first part,
it does seem like Neelix is talking about a gangbang of some sort.
that Captain Janeway handled with admirable enthusiasm. They are making that's an intentional joke. It is an intentional joke, right? Like, there's no way it's not an intentional joke.
I guess I have no idea. I assume so.
But you thought it was a joke, right?
I mean,
it has to be, right? It's not just we're just reading into what they were talking about, right?
I didn't explicitly think it was trying to be a sex joke.
Oh.
But I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
See, because I thought it was explicitly trying to be a joke, and I was like, I thought it was such a good example of this like Voyager tone that I've been talking about before, where it's like, I couldn't see that kind of joke happening on any other Star Trek show. I didn't think. It felt very much like a Voyager thing, where it's sort of, it's like in on the joke about itself, and it seems very snake eats its own tail type of Voyager thing. But I thought it was interesting.
What is the self-referential thing you think it's commenting on?
Just maybe it's not self-referential, but it's like it's like the writers being aware that they're writing a television show, and so they've layered it with like a kind of nod to the audience that's like, this is like the wrong environment for this conversation, because the characters are not having a joke between themselves. It's purely between the writers and the audience that are having a joke with it.
Sure.
So it's I guess it goes in line with my thing of like Voyager. Not that I thought it was a bad scene or anything, but like Voyager takes itself less seriously than some of the other shows do, and I think that's an example of it, like taking itself less seriously.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah.
All right. This is Coda, the latest episode of Star Trek Voyager that we're going to be covering. It is the 15th episode of the third season. Came out on January 29th, 1997. Written by Jerry Taylor, directed by Nancy Malone in Universe Date 50518.6, which is 2373. In Coda, after her apparent death, Captain Janeway's journey to the afterlife, guided by her father, leaves her with suspicions. So here we go. This is Coda, which is basically, they took 4 other TNG scripts and they put them in a blender and they popped out with Coda. But what did you think about it?
I was very confused by this episode in that when it started, I was relieved that after the first time jump, they were like, "Oh, we're in a time loop. We need to figure out."
I thought that was hysterical. Janeway's sitting there. She goes like, "I haven't. Chakotay, I haven't done that dance since I was 6. What has happened? We're in a time loop right now, people."
Yes.
Yeah, just immediately snaps out.
I thought that was great. However, and so like that kind of got me into it, where I was like, "Okay, they're doing a time loop thing. They're at least being."
They know cause and effect exists. They're not doing it again.
Right. But then once it got into the other stuff and the stuff with her father and that she was dying, I got very confused. When I started to get into it, I was tempering my expectations because knowing this show, my thought was this is interesting. But I know the payoff is going to be a letdown.
So, and what part are you calling interesting here? Are you at the father yet?
No, when they get into the time loop stuff, but they're like aware of the time loop, and they're like that enough. That was enough for me to be like, okay, all right, they're going to do something a little bit different with the time loop.
I like the choose your own adventureness of it, which was they were getting very random endings very quickly, which I thought was funny. Yeah.
But I was tempering my expectations because I was like, as much as I'm enjoying this, I know that the end is going to be a letdown, which it was.
Well, I would say we'll get to the ending. I would say the middle is a tremendous letdown of this episode.
Well, yeah, because I think most of it is a letdown.
Yeah,
because once they get into the ghost stuff, I started thinking, what the hell was the point of all the time loop stuff?
Right. Yeah.
Because it seems to really not have anything to do with what's actually going on.
Yeah, well, so is this my understanding of what's going on is that the time loop is only functioning. The time loops have no purpose to the narrative other than to show you this like literalization of the alien trying to convince Janeway to die, right? Like that's the point of the time loops, right? Is that the alien in her brain is trying to bring her to the brink every single time.
Okay.
I think that's what's going on. But once they need to explain that, they stop doing it at that point. And so they no longer need to do the jumps to her imminent death over and over again. They have to have her actually talk to the alien at that point.
Yeah, it was a weird shift.
Yeah.
Especially because they never addressed that stuff. I don't know if they don't need to necessarily address everything, but like if you start with causality, time or repeating time loop, and then go into from there into you're dead and I'm an alien sucking my life force out of your soul or whatever. It's just it's a weird lateral move that is not it's
jarring.
Yeah, it's jarring, and it feels like two episodes, like you're saying. It feels like multiple episodes they kind of just jam together.
Yeah, because this is the I'm dead and no one can see me is the I think it's called the Next Phase episode of TNG where Geordi and Ro are invisible and the crew can't see them, so they think that they've died. Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, I that was fine. It was I was more into it until it got to the stuff with her ghost dad.
Yeah.
Do you remember the movie Ghost Dad?
Yep, Cosby.
Bill Cosby? Yeah. We've been talking about that movie a lot lately among various friends for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Without anyone having seen it in 15 years.
With like only some of us having seen it.
Yeah.
Mostly, oddly enough, the of the couples who have been discussing Ghost Dad very deeply.
Yeah.
Only the men seem to have seen Ghost Dad. Which is very strange.
What was that? What was that Hulk Hogan movie where he's a nanny?
Oh, that's Mr. Nanny.
Mr. Nanny. That Ghost Dad reminds me of Mr. Nanny for some reason.
Mr. Nanny has less
death
and supernatural
and acting caliber. Supernatural inklings. I forget what exactly happens in both Ghost Dad and Mr. Nanny. But
in Ghost Dad, he's not actually dead. Apparently, you find out he's in a coma, which makes sense because then, how do you get your dad back if he dies at the beginning, right?
Wait, so he's like force projecting himself?
Essentially, I believe so, yes. He's like astral projecting himself.
Wow. Yeah. That was a good episode of Voyager, when that one happened, too.
But yeah,
did you like...
I found myself thinking... it was difficult for me to separate the two things, the time loop from the dying stuff they were doing.
Yeah.
And it got extra confusing when it was like only she could remember the time loop, but then when the time loop reset itself, Chakotay could. It was kind of hard to grok in that sense.
Yeah.
I do kind of like the idea of. It's an interesting way to play. I kind of wish they hadn't done the ghost thing and just made the episode about which death is going to be the most convincing death for her. Like, what is going to be the one where she's like, okay, I'm dead. Like that's kind of interesting to me. Where it's if she's dying from that phage disease, she doesn't accept that, so that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. They crash land on the planet, she doesn't accept that, so that that's kind of interesting. What is going to be the thing that allows her to let go? And I understand. I guess I understand that's what they're getting at with the memorial service and her dad and Harry Kim's touching story about a hot dog eating contest.
They made some fresh Kool-Aid and it just stained.
He's telling that story and I'm picturing what he's describing, and it's just Harry Kim. His face is just purple with fruit juice, and then she sits down next to him, also face covered in fruit juice, and they just have like a moment where they've got like grapes dripping off their face, and she's like, "It's the little things, Harry."
It's the little things. Yeah, that's Harry needed an editor. I think that funeral sequence was pretty rough. It's
Yeah.
I think the second half of it doesn't work for the sense that I've been saying before, which is that Voyager's characters are not drawn well enough for these kind of things to mean anything. So like the funeral scene doesn't mean anything.
I'm not even convinced she's ever spoken to Harry, frankly.
Well, that in Harry's story, I was picturing what actually happened is that he goes up to her and he's like, "Oh, Captain, isn't this fun?" And she gives kind of like a yeah, and then just walks off. You know, there's no real interaction. And even what Harry was pointing to was like, this is pretty thin, Harry. I don't know if this is the moment that you should be telling the rest of the crew about.
I did like that he realized that at the end and just ejected out of the story. He's like, and that's when, I'm sorry, I need to go. Yep, that's when you realize your story was terrible.
The tears are welling up. Yeah, that's the.
I did that one time. I did that at when the youth pastor of my church, his family was leaving, and we were having a big thing for them. Everybody was going up and saying something, and I went up to say something. I don't remember what I said. But I went up to say something because I felt like, I should.
Sure.
And as soon as I was done, I just like walked away and I was like, I didn't say a goddamn thing. It was just complete nonsense. It was very emotional as I was saying it, but after I was done, I was like, I don't think anybody understood anything I was trying to say. I don't even understand it.
Did you end it by telling them to go back to hell, coward?
Yeah.
I think that would have been nice. No, but it was the best man bombing at his speech at the wedding and just getting to the end of his cue cards or his like index cards that he's got in his hands. We'll get through this content quickly. I was like you. I liked the first part of this much better, mostly because I like cause and effect so much that I was like, all right, I'll do it again.
That's, and that's, we're getting into that territory, right? Where they're starting to do that. And it's the thing everybody hates now, which is, this is just mining previous episodes. Yeah. And that's doing the heavy lifting of getting people to like it. And it's tough because like, it's actually more interesting to me in this era than it is in the era of Voyager than it is now, because now it's like, yeah, all right, well, whatever. We're just going to reach back into the stuff that people like. But on Voyager, all that stuff is fairly contemporary.
Yeah, it's contemporary to it. Yeah, that's the worst part of it. Probably it's probably more like Voyager is somewhat in some ways a little bit less forgivable because the new resurrection of Star Trek is clearly just like an IP money grab where they're like, you guys like this stuff. Here's all the stuff again. So here it is. But Voyager was, it would be like, I don't know what the analog to a modern thing would be, but it would be like at the beginning of the Marvel movie series or something, like you just start referencing that in like the third movie already. And it's like, well, you haven't really done anything since then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I feel like it probably has happened other places where like a long running TV show starts. Yeah. Referencing itself in like how many times have they done this on like Law and Order, something that's been on for 20 years.
And I mean, Trek at this point has what, like 300 episodes of itself. Yeah.
The weird thing is though about this, it's the same, mostly it's a lot of the same people. The writers, so it's like, it's like kind of plagiarizing themselves a little bit, which is kind of strange, but yeah, it's funny. And I was just gonna say, I don't mind it. I think part of the reason that we might have responded to the beginning is not only because we like cause and effect, but specifically because of what they do, where they are self-aware enough to be like, we know what this is. This isn't just going to be cause and effect. We're going to put a bit of a twist on it. It's like, oh, okay. Well, they're aware enough that we know that we don't want to sit through Chakotay and Janeway trying to figure out that they're in a time loop for the next 45 minutes.
No, it's very much like, to make it into the superhero metaphor, it's the second generation of superhero movies where they're like, well, we're kind of rebooting stuff, but we can't just repeat the origin story because everyone already knows it, so we'll cut the origin story down to 10% of what it needs to be. It's
like one of my favorite things in the British Hammer horror movies is that everybody just seems to know that Dracula exists.
Yeah.
And so every movie where there's vampires in it, you don't get that scene where people are like, vampires. There's no way that those exist. Those are just children's stories. It's like as soon as somebody sees 2 marks on a neck, they're like, get a steak, get some garlic. There's fucking vampires around.
Right. Yeah.
And so you don't have to deal with. So it's like that. It's like that kind of shorthand where it's like everybody knows. Let's just get into the story. But then where they lost, I assume both of us is I guess somebody fell asleep on the computer and someone else had to finish the episode.
Yeah, they copy pasted from a handoff episode. I agree. I mean, and even if it had stayed the cause and effect storyline, it would have been a C- of a cause and effect storyline. Sure. I was just to repeat myself, I was mostly intrigued by it because of how it's totally different from cause and effect in that the outcomes they get to are wildly different from each other. They don't just keep dying in the same way and they're trying to avoid it. Like it's just how many choose your adventure paths can Janeway get to die in. And the related note before I forget about this is that Kate Mulgrew's acting kryptonite might be death scenes because all of them are terrible. When the Vidian chokes her, that seems awful. When she gets hit with like the hits her head or whatever and dies there, that seems awful. So I would try to avoid Janeway dying.
I actually thought she was pretty good when she died when the doctor euthanized her.
Oh, I would have thought that was a bad one too. I just couldn't remember what it was.
Yeah, I thought that one was kind of like, it was a little bit kind of scary because she's I don't know how realistic it is, but she's like talking and then she's going like, like she's gasping for single breaths in a way that's very unnatural. That was kind of creepy.
That's a good example of like, I thought the episode had kind of cool moments in it. Like I liked the doctor doing that. I thought that was kind of a cool moment. It's all just clusterfucked together in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense.
It is. I would, if I was Janeway, after all of that stuff, I would have really needed to sit down and be like, how accurate was this alien's understanding of my crew members? Would the doctor choose to euthanize me if it came down to it? Like,
it's never the same between Janeway and the EMH from now on.
Yeah, like it's, again, this is another one that ends with the boop 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 boop, like high five freeze frame.
Yes.
And it just felt weirdly dissatisfying after the shit that she just went through.
I guess that's the kind of the whole thing is basically a dream sequence, right? Which makes it particularly unlikable. It's not in the there is a kind of a different resolution to it, and it's maybe the same thing that I was just talking about. There's like moments like this is essentially a dream sequence that takes a very long time for you to realize that, as most dream sequences, well, not most, but as some badly done dream sequences are. You wait until the end and then it's all revealed and you feel let down. However, the cool moment was when the portal to hell opened and the alien's like, "I'll feast on your soul, Janeway." He just walks back into hell. I thought that was, I didn't think they did like jack shit with the hell metaphor. Like I didn't think that worked at all on any level. But seeing that alien just be like, "I'll wait for you, Janeway," and then just exits this like plane of existence. Janeway made like for Janeway. The ending being that happy boop, 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 boop thing that you mentioned, Janeway, shouldn't she feel a little bit like she's being haunted by this hell demon that's going to come for her?
Yeah, because she even, is it her? I think that
she brings it up. She's like, "Do you think he's going to chase us all the way back to the Alpha Quadrant?"
And well, I think it's in her log at the end. She's like, "I have no idea if this is always what death is."
Right.
If it's not a quadrant specific thing, but there are always just aliens out there waiting to feast on your dying soul. And then she's just like, let's go play volleyball.
That's super unsatisfying. But it was, it was one of those moments that made me think like, this was the cool moment that the writer came up with and they could not put a script around it. Yeah. It just didn't pan out the way that they wanted to. And again, just to reiterate, I don't think Janeway reacts realistically to what has happened to her at the end, which is fairly terrifying and should be something that keeps her awake at night. Yeah,
it was also a little strange to have her dad just, when she's like, "Daddy, you've been dead," and he's like, "Yes, I drowned horribly under frozen ice on a planet you've never been to." It was just very very strange.
I raised you to be a doubter and a skeptic, but believe me this time.
Yeah. Do your own research, Catherine.
Yeah. Yeah. So how come you didn't like the second part as much? That's what I'm assuming that you're saying.
Yeah, it just I don't know. It just wasn't. I didn't think they were doing anything particularly interesting.
No, it's boring.
Yeah, it's pretty boring. Like the whole thing being a dream, ostensibly, is strange because like, why even bother doing the thing? I think maybe the problem with this episode is an extension of what you were talking about with that opening scene, in that it is too self-aware that it is a TV show, just like full stop.
Yeah.
Because afterwards I found myself thinking, why did they do the time loop thing if it's not a time loop, or if it has like not really much to do with what the actual thing was?
Yeah.
And why did they do the ghost thing the way they do the ghost thing, where it's like, oh, Tuvok and Cass might be able to hear her,
right?
Like, why even float if he's this monster? Why even float that as a possibility?
Why not just have her? Why not just steal the thing from Tapestry and just have it be an afterlife?
Right?
Why she can be in purgatory essentially? Just wait. She has to make the decision to go to the afterlife, but there's no reason for this alien to set this up as if she's stuck in purgatory in reality and can watch everything.
Exactly. And that feels like the writer being self-aware, or being aware that we are watching a TV show,
right?
Because the only reason that you do that is to have the audience go. Is to create another layer of mystery for the audience, whether or not that actually plays into the resolution, which it doesn't.
Sort of a modern Trekkie trope. It's like a proto-modern Trek storyline.
Yeah, we talk about that quite a bit on Picard, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
where it's like they lay this stuff out all the time, and they're laying it out just for the sake of laying it out, just for giving you that like mystery endorphin rush.
Yeah,
which it ultimately has nothing to do with anything.
Right. It's just to keep you preoccupied with it. And this is just you have to fill this timeline with something that is kind of mysterious. And the best way to do that is to have Janeway be present with everybody else, even though ultimately all of that is fake and none of it meant anything. And there was no reason for her to be with them in the first place, because the alien shoots himself in the foot. Like Janeway's just, the alien's just like, you should just give up on life. And she's like, well, I could kind of hang out here and be like a spiritual cheerleader. He's like, no, just give up on life. There's no reason you would want to do that. He clearly hasn't thought things out.
Like, wouldn't it be more interesting if this ghost showed up and says, like, Catherine, you're dead. And she's like, well, but I've got so many. Instead of being like, listen, these are all your friends. They're saying such beautiful things about. Wouldn't it be more interesting if he was like, you're dead. Not only are you dead, you're going to hell.
Right. Yes.
And she's like, I'm sorry. What? And he's like, no, you're going to hell. I'm here to drag you to hell. She's like, well, I thought I was a pretty good person. He's like, yeah, well, a little person named Tuvix would have something different to say. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
there's kind of like an inverse Christmas Carol thing, which is kind of interesting, where it's like, here's all the reasons why you're going to hell.
Yeah.
And having her just like, essentially, instead of putting her into like she
dropped that little girl into that canyon in that episode with Sulu. Yeah.
Instead of lulling her into like acceptance, just like beating her down into acceptance, being like, yeah, you're a piece of shit, so you deserve to be in hell, to the point where she's like, yeah, I guess you're right. And like, that's what he feeds. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's something a little bit more interesting than whatever this is.
No, that's the like, right. So if you want to say
that Voyager, time you made Harry Kim eat 3 gallons worth of berries till he vomited all over everybody's feet.
Do it.
What's the matter, Harry? You chicken?
Harry Kim.
We haven't tested these berries. I don't care.
Just a funnel in his mouth full of berries that she's smashing into with a stick. So like, if you want to say the Voyager is just a TNG evolved, right, and the writers are just sort of like going to advance what TNG did and do something different with it. There is a space for what I thought was really interesting was the hell metaphor. Like, if what you're saying is the alien appears and he's just like, you're going to hell, but they dress it up in this Star Trek way of like, they don't call it hell, but they do what they do in this episode, which is it's another plane of existence that doesn't look very nice and you don't want to be there. And like they have a character thing about that, or like the sci-fi allegory is about that, but it's dressed up in the sci-fi aspect of it. But I could see that working on TNG in some ways, except for the fact that it feels too, like quote unquote extreme for TNG. But Voyager, if you're trying to do something different, I feel like you need to go to that extreme place. There needs to be like this sort of like, this captain dealt with like the Event Horizon plot, basically.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, what's more interesting? My dad showed up to lull me to heaven, or the fucking Cenobites showed up.
Right. And Voyager could do its Star Trek version of that. And I think that would have been interesting. But instead, it just copied a TNG script and then abandoned it for the character work that it should have been about, except that Voyager can't do character work well because the characters aren't very good at this point outside of their broad like portrayal as a character. So you end up with this where you are, and Janeway's dad isn't fascinating enough. It's too bad. It's because I would have really been into that. You're going to hell, Catherine Janeway, unless you convince me otherwise. Like even Tapestry didn't go that far. So just do something with it.
Yeah.
Go back to hell, coward.
Give us some chains. Yeah. Chains and horns. Daddy, I don't remember those horns coming out of your head.
How do you think that Chakotay? I found the CPR scenes fascinating in this one.
He's got that fucking spray that could wake her up, and that's not the first thing he tries.
That's exactly what I was going to say. He's doing chest compressions for 5 minutes and doesn't do anything, and he gives her the hypo spray, and she wakes right up. As he should just give her the hypo spray right away. He also says her name too much when he's doing the CPR. I don't think that's necessary to keep saying the person's name over and over again.
Yeah, that felt very much like just say some stuff. Like it just was like
just ad lib.
Ad lib how you would try to save somebody's life.
How
it had that feeling of like when people who are not good at ad libbing, and all they do is just add a bunch of swears into
just
what
say
they're
fuck
saying.
Everything. Catherine, don't fucking. It is pretty generic. His line is literally like, "Don't you die on me," which is a parody line at this point. What are your before we get to patron comments, because we do have a little bit of a hard out. What are your thoughts on? I continue to be befuddled by the Chakotay and Janeway. Are they romantically interested or not? It's so subtle that it's impossible to pick up either way.
Yeah, I think I can't tell if they're indecisive about it or if they are just trying to go for this thing where it's like, they're clearly into each other, but they both realize they probably shouldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Which
could it also just be they're good friends at this point? Because I
think so. Yeah.
I think just going by the dialogue, you could almost just read it as he's just kind of concerned for a friend.
Yeah. Which dialogue in particular are you talking about?
He has one. Basically the dying scene, because the dying scene, he calls her Catherine all the time. There's no sort of like formality at that point, but it comes across, it's just walking this line of like, I can't tell if he loves her or if he just really likes her as a person anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And Janeway doesn't go either way with it. So, and even their conversation on the shuttlecraft, right? It's like semi flirty, but not really. It's just kind of this awkward middle ground. Anyway, anything else to say about the episode? We go to patron thoughts.
Yeah, I actually, excuse me. I was thinking when the time loop first started, and they're like, okay, we're in a time loop, and then they kind of like get out of the situation, and then they get blown up or something, and then get whipped back, and then they get out of the situation third way and end up back on the ship, and then it's a time loop, and then they get whipped back again. I was thinking, man, I would have fought so hard to have the end of Voyager be Catherine Janeway dies and the last scene is they're back on the shuttlecraft. Like I was thinking about that would be such a ballsy move, but also such a big fuck you to have one of these Groundhog Day situations that you seemingly get out of, and then like 3 episodes later or something, you die, and and all of a sudden you get ripped back to the place you were 3 episodes ago.
Yeah.
I wish somebody would do that. I would have a lot of respect for that.
Then maybe there's a YouTube edit of that with the end game episode where it snaps back to that shot of Janeway sitting in the shuttlecraft, and that's it. Fade to black. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening and supporting the show today. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/the Pensky File. A couple bucks a month, you get the ability to leave comments about upcoming episodes, and we read them. That's at the $5 and up level. And otherwise, you get access to a whole bunch of podcasts and all that stuff. There's a whole bunch of extra stuff at patreon.com/the Pensky File. This is the first comment about this episode from our faithful Patreon listeners. This is Kyle Barrett. Clay, I sent it to you.
Coda. It begins with scenes repeating in an episode which itself feels like a repeat of past episodes. But while it ultimately gets to a point which feels new with all the time loop stuff, I kept expecting to be jumped back to the shuttlecraft at any moment, so I never felt I could invest in the actual drama of the scenes, which all turn out to be nonsensical and fake anyway, making the whole exercise feel boring and a waste of time. On a rewatch, knowing only the last 15 minutes were important, it felt as boring as a Ken Burns documentary on the history of boredom. As boring as typing in your Netflix password using a TV remote, as boring as ordering a korma at an Indian restaurant, although it's not quite as boring as someone with online chess as a hobby.
Boo.
I feel like someone's being targeted.
I'm being targeted here.
One podcaster who read this comment early and reacted like a little bitch out of 5.
They come into my inbox. I have no opportunity but to read them.
That's fun. It does remind me of. So I can't remember if I've talked about this story before. But we were driving to Washington D.C. And we had been driving for like 7 hours or something like that. And the podcast we were listening to was over or whatever, and it was dark out and it was kind of rainy. And then then my girlfriend goes, "Do you mind if I put something on?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." She's got various different interesting podcasts. And I'm sitting there driving, the thing starts, and it's like, "Today, we're going to talk about boredom and all of the facets of being bored." And I was like, "Oh, no." My eyes just got really heavy. And it was literally a podcast about being bored.
Yeah.
And it was about as exciting as you would expect.
We would have had a guest today, but that would have been too exciting. So
Exactly.
It'll just be me talking to myself.
Today we're talking about boredom.
Just heavy sighs into the microphone.
What to talk about?
Kyle talked about when he wasn't being a little jackass in his comments. He talked about repeating past episodes. I did. I mean, obviously, the repetition gets you. For whatever reason, the shuttlecraft in this episode has started to make me question why Voyager does this so often. Why do they send off a shuttle by itself that is not anywhere near, what's to be gained from just not the ship going to where the shuttlecraft needs to go?
Yeah, I have no idea. Every time they do this, it's like I don't even know or care why they're going to where they're going, because it's always like we're going to this asteroid to pick up samples of something.
Last one, they just went and talked to an alien planet, and it's like, why wouldn't the Voyager just go there and go to the planet too? It is weird. It's that fact that they can't escape the TNG-ness of it, and like in TNG this makes sense. In Voyager it makes very little sense why these shuttles keep going off by themselves. Anyway, that's what I think about when the episodes aren't very good. Taxile Bear says, Coda, this episode lacks a satisfying conclusion as it basically boils down to being a dream. That said, individual bits are intriguing. For example, the doctor euthanizing is super creepy. Jaron Hatch says, I'm not sure who's more confused here.
Also, sorry, I love that was one of his swings at getting her to accept dying, is
to be murdered,
giving her this disease and then having her subordinate murder her on the ship for her own good. Oh yeah, I may as well just accept this shit.
I was disappointed in the doctor's medical work. She's like, how could this happen? He's like, maybe you touched one of them or something. Yeah. She's like, Doctor, we've touched all of them in previous episodes and nothing ever happened. He's like, you're right. I don't know what I was talking about.
You're right. It's weird, right?
Are we done with the Vidians? Are they just gone? Like, I know they're in this episode, but how are they going to bring up more Vidians when in this episode they're like, we're out of their space. They're gone. They must be gone.
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
Jaron Hatch says, I'm not sure who's more confused here, Captain Janeway or the episode itself. Is this a time loop episode? A something is off with the crew episode? A life after death episode? Maybe one of these days Voyager will actually commit to an idea rather than scrape the bottom of TNG's barrel. 2.5 viewers convinced that Janeway is apparently an exquisite off-screen ballet dancer out of 5. Patrick Seba says, this ep, it was boring. Let's talk about the song. It's a visual hand job, so stirring, so long. You've got time to mourn, this nebula porn. As Jerry Goldsmith, he uses a trumpet as bong. 2 full decades of watching Star Trek before realizing the ship only flies to the right out of 5. It's all relative.
You know, I did also think that was really funny when they end up back on the shuttle the 3rd time.
Yeah.
And they're both like, it's a time loop. We're here again. And then she just looks straight ahead and goes, that must be the reason. And it's
Right.
this giant like supernova in front of the shuttle that they apparently didn't notice before.
Yeah, good episode. This is Norman Buckwald with Coda.
Coda, I loved Cause and Effect. I loved the next phase. But this mess of rehashed plots makes me wish we got an episode that finally answered the mother in the holographic attic instead of the demon. The alien. Sorry. Let me start that again. Coda.
Do a time loop here. We'll just
time loop. I'm back in my chair. I loved Cause and Effect. I loved the next phase, but this mess of rehashed plots makes me wish we got an episode that finally answered the mother in the holographic attic instead of the demon alien entity that needs to be nourished, posing as the Admiral Father. I guess if you count this episode, Janeway does die more often than Harry Kim in the series. 1, Help Me Janeway revisited, no, out of 5.
Yeah.
And for the record, Vanishing Point is the next Coda.
Sticking out tongue emoji.
Ah.
Did you there was a story in the news now, like emojis are like, one of the courts decided that like emojis are like legally binding as like a statement, basically, because there were some lawyers or something got in trouble for using emojis and they could use it against them because apparently everyone understands what they mean at this point.
Great.
Point XG says,
Has anybody ever used an emoji that like wasn't slightly being sarcastic about it?
Right. Or I'm either sarcastic about it or I'm hyper conscious that I'm doing it and I wonder if it's a good idea to do. You know, like there's people send them on ends of emails now and it's like, it's kind of similar to the exclamation point. You feel like you should put an exclamation point on everything when you write an email, but it just comes across as insane.
Have you run into, I've noticed people who are like Gen Xers, I've noticed explicitly with that age group, liberally use ellipses in their sentences when they type it out in places that like you wouldn't expect them to be.
When they're like texting you mean?
Yes. So like if I say, what time should I be there? They'll be like 6 o'clock ...
Oh.
And it's like, I
don't know
how to
interesting.
I don't know how to interpret that.
Yeah. I don't think you know what I think that means. Are your parents Gen Xers or boomers?
Boomers.
Okay.
I've run into it with a couple of my cousins and a couple
so
other
just
people
slightly older,
Yeah.
older people than us. Okay.
Yeah. It's very odd.
Huh. Really?
I wouldn't have noticed it if it wasn't for the fact that I have 3 data points from around the same age range that
they all do that. Maybe they're all just very dramatic people. They just want to keep you on the edge of their seats with their whether or not it's going to be 6 o'clock. No, the boomers sign their texts. They're like they'll say like love mom or love dad or something at the end of the text message. Gen X. No, I'll have to explore this. I have to figure out who's like 10, 15 years older than me. I'll text them and see what they say. I'll report back.
Okay.
Point XG says, Coda. It started off with a great what the hell is going on opening, but once it got to Papa Janeway, it really started to be a slog. It was just a bunch of, come here, Catherine, it's great. No, I'm not sure. Come on, you know you want to come here. No, I don't, but you really, really need to. No, I'll pass. It felt like it ended too easily. Janeway needed to fight that longer. I kind of thought he'd show back up again, but there just wasn't enough there. Grappler John Zorn.
This episode also continues my dislike for the old style Starfleet uniform without any sort of like visible undershirt around the neck.
Yeah.
I don't know why I find it just doesn't look right. They need like a turtleneck or something.
Yeah, it just looks more proper. No one would wear just that shirt. Grapple John Zorn says, well, cause and effect, it ain't. Changeling is our next comment, which I'll send to you.
This episode was rather unfocused. First, it is a time loop science problem show, then a nightmare world with the doctor trying to give Janeway the Canadian cure. And then it closes out with the movie Contact. Honestly, I would have preferred it if Janeway possessed Kess and told Harry Kim that his mother sucks cocks in hell.
That's the best insult in cinematic history, isn't it?
It's really good.
It's so good.
2, I know that is not the dad from Frasier, but I'm going to pretend that it was the dad from Frasier out of 5. It'd be much better if it was.
I wish it was the dad from Frasier. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had the dog with him. He
was in his chair, just like everywhere he appears, he's in that recliner.
I've really enjoyed. It's been stuck in my head for a while, ever since we watched the episode. The phrase from Deadwood: "Anyone who doesn't believe me sucks cock by choice."
Those who doubt me suck cock by choice.
Yes. I find that very funny. And very, very effective, because it's just so you're not ready for it.
No, that's my.
You're ready to be called a cocksucker, but not in that particular manner. It's a perfect line. It represents my idea of like perfect jokes, which is that it starts off as something, it turns something else like drastically different. Mm-hmm. Like, so here's my favorite joke. Clay, what's the difference between jam and jelly? I'm not sure.
I can't jelly my cock down your throat. Right? I love that joke, and I love the reaction it gets, but I think it's just like truly like a perfect little, it's so unexpected about, and it's just like, that's what that Deadwood line is too. It's just like, wow, there's just like, those who tell me suck cock my choice. All right. Tuvok's mother is sucking cocks in hell. We'll move on to the next line here. Artorias. I'll read this one. The devil's in the details, and unfortunately, this one was rather hellish. The only 2 things I got out of it was it would be interesting to see an episode played with an evil version of the Doctor. When Janeway was getting choked, strangled, it seemed a little less like dying and a whole lot like something you'd find in a Rick Berman fantasy. I agree with that. I think Mulgrew's dying tends to go that way for some reason. Remember, you can only go there once you give consent. 2 wishful choke me daddies out of 5. Yeah, I also felt there was a metaphor there about giving consent to something. The episode doesn't care about it, but for some reason, Janeway needed to consent to the alien, which you'd think would mean something in the context of the episode, but does not mean anything.
Right, yeah.
Matt Ross says, Coda, combining TNG's cause and effect in the scene in the play Our Town, along with possible desires of the crew to kill the captain. It was fun to watch how many times Kathy dies. I also can't help notice this alien entity is like a Babylon 5 character, the Soul Hunters. B'Elanna's crossed-armed speech makes me wonder if she was being forced to say her speech, and I was waiting for Kim to say something like, now I can get a promotion. Still, this was creepy fun. 3 out of 5.
Now that you say that, it is the whole modus operandi of the alien is very weird. That she has to agree to go.
He has writerly games. He has writerly rules that he has to follow. Yeah,
it's very strange.
Yeah, she has to agree to walk through the portal. He can't drag her. Like he can't. It's just an unthought out thing. Jonas says, if Wes falls asleep watching bad episodes of Voyager, I have to watch episodes like Coda in installments when I'm making coffee, doing dishes, folding laundry. It's the only way. The funeral scene was cringe. 1 out of 5. I actually did not fall asleep during this episode.
Wait a minute. Did they ever figure out why their shuttle crashed?
They got shot with phasers or something in the one version.
But
I know it.
In one version they did, but that clearly wasn't real.
Right, but it did happen. They must have actually hit turbulence, I guess.
They must have. Yeah, I don't know. Again, put in there. It's very self-aware.
And I wonder if are those aliens? They don't confirm this. Are those aliens stuck on that planet that they landed on, or can those aliens go anywhere? I guess that's the whole point of the ending. You don't really know, but
right.
I guess we'll see. Anyway, this is Royo with Coda.
Coda, it's like mashing great episodes like Tapestry and Cause and Effect together and getting an amorphous blob out of it. For an episode that feels like it has severe ADD, it also comes across as terribly boring. First, it starts like a drama, then morphs into a mystery, then changes its mind and turns into a character piece about Janeway, but it gets bored of that and turns into the monster of the week. The X-Files episode where Mulder and Scully get high on mushrooms and are slowly digested as they hallucinate was a million times more interesting, creepy, and humorous than this. That was a good episode of the show. While gassing a patient to death against their will is deliberately out of character for the Doctor, this seems like something Phlox would totally do. 1.5 out of 5.
This seems out of character. Nick the Rat says, is the final comment, Coda, Neelix being insufferable, Chakotay the first officer, and Catherine the captain leaving the ship together to go on a mission, a time loop, Kim acting like a little baby ensign. I feel like I'm stuck in a time loop watching this episode. They should have called it yada 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 instead. Why is it called Coda again anyways? An Enterprise episode I'd rate a 2 is more fun than this Voyager 2 out of 5, in my opinion. A coda is the part of a musical piece where you return to when you get to the end of it. That's why it's called Coda.
It is also the final Led Zeppelin album that was made up of unreleased stuff after John Bonham died.
Oh, there you go.
It's fine. It's not bad.
That's it. Thanks, everybody, for listening to our coverage of Coda, the most recent Voyager episode that we've watched.
It's also the Best Picture winner from last year, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah.
Coda.
That movie literally nobody saw.
Is that the one that's in like is that the COVID one? Apple's Coda.
Yeah, it's about like deaf people, I think, or something.
Oh.
I
predominantly
don't know a
deaf
person.
cast.
Yeah, I don't know a single person that's seen it, and that's not a marker of its quality. It's just, it was a weird year.
Yeah. It got Best Picture, Adapted Screenplay, and Best Supporting Actor. All right, well, yeah, I didn't see that. Don't know. Well, Coda is all over the news, I guess. So that's it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/The Pensky File is the best way to do it. We are at our own review time here. I think the patrons came out, I'm going to say that they came out at like a 2.1 right there for the average of the patrons. What are you going to give it on a scale of 1 to 5?
I was really excited when this episode started. I was ready to give this episode a 4.
Wow.
Yeah, because as it was going, I'm like, okay, all right, we're doing the
time loop
cause
stuff.
and effect thing. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Like I'm like, all right, if this continues on this
cause and effect is a 5. This has to be somewhat close to it.
Like Disco Stew said about the disco sales in 1977. If this trend continues, but clearly it didn't. So I'm going to give it a 2.
Yeah, it's a 2 for me, too. I actually thought it was somewhat better than the recent episodes we've had just because the first 10 minutes hooked me.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
same. Yeah. That's why I was so excited. Like, oh, this is actually something that's keeping my attention.
Yeah, and my attention was quickly lost once Ghost Janeway's father showed up, and that was not nearly as interesting. It came back slightly at the end. It was a little bit of a roller coaster at the end. I was like, oh my God, there's a hell demon, and Janeway's soul is in danger. But no, they're not going to. The hell demon is never going to return, unfortunately. So that's it. I'm going to give it a 2 as well. I think it's a 2. Continue our streak of 2s here on Voyager Season 3. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. Best way to support the show, Patreon.com/The Pensky File. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
I was in California last week, and we went to
Knows how to party.
Paramount Studios. We did the Paramount Studio tour, and we learned about how there was a fire on the studio that destroyed a large part of the studio in 1984. Discovered by William Shatner, because they were shooting Star Trek IV at the time.
The fire was discovered?
The fire was discovered by William Shatner, and according to our tour guide, the reason he discovered it is because he apparently had a tendency he hated craft services.
Yeah.
And so he would constantly go to different sets and steal food.
Steal their craft services?
See what they had.
Okay, sure.
And the rumor is he discovered the fire because he thought he smelled barbecue. And he was trying to track down the barbecue.
That's like a Simpsons joke. I don't think that's not a real story.
It is. It's very much a Simpsons joke.
Not smell barbecue.
But on top of that, check out the other shows, Rotten Horror Picture Show, badass podcast. Sean and I did a Patreon episode talking about The Flash, and I've got a new issue of Batman White Knight Presents Generation Joker. Issue number 3 is out right now, so pick that up. I'd be much obliged. And yeah, that's about it.
Blood Fever is our next episode of the podcast. Blood Fever is the next episode of Star Trek Voyager. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Patreon's always out there. Discord's always out there. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know what you think about the Voyager's 3rd season, because I think it kind of sucks. It's not a good season of television, unfortunately. People keep saying wait. Although, what was the other show that people kept they said it for Enterprise, too. People kept saying wait, but that didn't pan out. So we'll see. I know 7 appears. We'll get a couple episodes of 7 before we start giving up again. Thanks, Blood Fever. See you next time. And those who doubt me suck cocks by hell. See ya.